When Joni and Suzy Lamb revealed a startling news that nobody anticipated, the internet was taken aback. Both admirers and detractors are in a state of shock over the revelation of Joni Lamb's frightening side. Joni has a lengthy history of being well-known and having a powerful voice. However, it is probable that her reputation will be damaged. Suzy and Joni's remarks weren't merely rumors. The incident might permanently alter her professional trajectory. Like a whisper in the darkness, it started out softly. The majority of people would never imagine that a family dispute of this nature would be featured in the media. The Lamb family has long been regarded as a symbol of fortitude, solidarity, and unshakable faith. They were more than simply a family to the millions of viewers of Daystar. They served as a real-life illustration of how God supports and leads individuals. After Joni and Suzy Lamb shared their tale, the photo was gone. What they stated went beyond a minor altercation or attitude conflict. The claim was so horrible that it destroyed the family's hard-earned reputation. Because we don't feel safe at home, Suzy and I are currently at an unknown location. As of this afternoon, a number of national reporters have been provided with all the proof, in addition to Julie Roy, who has been provided with all the evidence and is currently composing a story that will be published shortly. According to Jonathan, the pivotal moment occurred on a family vacation to Florida in August 2021. What should have been a period of relaxation became a nightmare. He claimed to have witnessed something that no father should ever see as he entered the room. A family member named Pete undressed his young daughter. Shock and incredulity were combined with fear and rage. The image of a devoted, devout family was abruptly replaced with an unsolved query. Did they mistreat their kid? Had they failed to notice the warning signs? They had to cling to bits of reality that were too terrible to believe at first because their daughter found it difficult to convey what had happened. Jonathan and Suzy, however, were unable to remain silent any longer. They believed that they needed to be protectors in addition to being parents. It was not an easy decision for them to go public. They claimed that when they explained the situation to Daystar spokesperson and family matriarch Joni, she advised them to keep things private rather than offering consolation. That was treachery to Jonathan and Suzy. They were prepared for a grandma who would stop at nothing to ensure the safety of her grandchild. Rather, they witnessed an attempt to preserve the ministry's reputation, even at the expense of concealing the facts. After that, their lives were altered. They claimed to have left their house to travel to an unidentified location because they no longer felt comfortable. With sorrowful hearts, they shared what they knew with Christian writer Julie Roy and the national media. They planned to discuss a few stories that would shortly be in the news. We had no idea this would be our life. For months and months, we prayed to God to change our course. However, we must ultimately follow. You must respond if he says, "You know what? It's the more difficult approach." Leaving was simple. But if he says, "I'm calling you to do this," then we have to do it. It has been difficult, but he has guided us at every turn. He's given us a lot, too. On the day they said it, it became news. The concept of a single Christian kingdom disintegrated in the world. What had once been viewed as a gleam of hope was now being viewed as a tale of treachery, unsaid suffering, and secrets maintained. The story started at that point. Nobody was able to halt the explosion, thus it wasn't a narrative. When the storm started, Joni Lamb was the center of attention. For years, she has served as Daystar's spokesperson, and her calm voice has assisted individuals in resolving issues related to faith, family, and life. She was well known for her strength, integrity, and religious devotion. Therefore, when Jonathan and Suzy informed everyone of their charges, it was unclear what had transpired in the family or how Joni felt. She made good choices about her battlegrounds. There was no interview with outside media or impartial news conference. She had always been in charge of the message, so instead, she sat in front of her own cameras on her own show. She spoke with tears in her eyes as she stared directly at the camera. "I did nothing. Marcus never took any action." Despite their simplicity, the words had great meaning. For her fans, that was sufficient. It seemed premeditated, defensive, and empty, according to her detractors. According to Joni, the accusations were directed at her character, as well as the church she founded with her late husband. She informed the audience that Jonathan's anger was greater than his desire for his daughter to receive justice. She claimed that his expulsion from Daystar and his disappointment at not being selected to continue in his father's footsteps had escalated into something more serious. Because they were founded on hate that had been transformed into retaliation, people were hearing things that she claimed were untrue. She said that in addition to being untrue, the accusations were made with her harm in mind. She shared with the audience her many years of service and the sacrifices she made for her church and family. When her own son claimed that she had betrayed her granddaughter, she depicted a mother and grandmother who were devastated. After hearing this sincere appeal, many of her loyal supporters were even more loyal. A devout woman refused to back down from lies being spread. "I want to reassure you that God always sees the bigger picture, even when things look like chaos and bad things are happening. As long as we obey His commands, uphold moral principles, and speak the truth, He will provide for us. Thank you for your prayers, though, as the journey has been difficult. We need them, but He will." Thank you, then. Some claim that Joni spent much of her time defending herself rather than demonstrating empathy for her granddaughter's suffering. But when she wasn't with her friends, the response was much less sure. They answered, "I never hid anything." People asked her why she hadn't called the police immediately when the claims initially surfaced, and it sounded more like an attempt to win sympathy. Why did she appear to be more concerned about Daystar's reputation than the security of her granddaughter? Joni did not provide a definitive response to those queries. She clarified that although the case had previously been investigated, no solid proof had been discovered. Only when Jonathan was let go from Daystar had the investigation resumed. She gave the impression that the timing wasn't coincidental. She could see from all of these signs that she was the object of a defamation campaign. She claimed that while Jonathan was employed at Daystar, he was given a comprehensive treatment plan, but he disregarded it. When he was sacked, she expressed her fury, which only intensified. She even revealed to the audience that he had rejected her offer to settle their disagreement so they could start getting along again. This gave the impression that Jonathan was insane, irreconcilable, and more concerned with exacting revenge than coming up with a workable solution. As the story progressed, Joni uttered more and more spiritual things. The adversary was working harder than ever to ruin her mission and her family, she informed the locals. She prayed, claiming that God would reveal the truth to her because He knew what was in her heart. She explained to everyone that she intended to follow in the footsteps of her late husband, Marcus, who had also been accused of persevering through a difficult situation. The way this was put together was obvious to those who already trusted her. It was a spiritual conflict rather than a family catastrophe. Still, critics persisted. They claimed that she appeared to care more about her appearance than accepting responsibility, as seen by her repeated denials without considering them. Although she had qualities that made her appear strong at first, she now came across as frigid. Many people were more curious about whether she had intentionally lied than about whether she had acted improperly by prioritizing her reputation over her accountability. The more she spoke, the more obvious it became that she had no intention of changing her mind. She refused to acknowledge that she had made mistakes, or even that she might have done so. Rather, she intensified her narrative. Suzy and Jonathan had the wrong views, were irate, and were dishonest. She was innocent, her mind was clear, and she had never lost trust. Supporting letters started to arrive. Those in attendance offered prayers, encouraging remarks, and commitment pledges. Some pastors defended her, claiming that she was the target of unjustified criticism from her own family. She was still regarded by women in Daystar culture as a woman of God who had dedicated her life to service. Doubts, however, only increased outside of that small group. Former workers started posting their opinions online, and some of them concurred with Jonathan's assertions that there was disorder in the company. More than 400 individuals were arrested as a result of the massive marches and protest groups that followed the killings. On social media, hashtags gained popularity, but they also led to user disputes. While some are uniting to support Joni, others are demanding accountability. Every public appearance she made and every sentimental statement she made were scrutinized by the media. Although videos of her sobbing in real time went viral, they frequently evoked revulsion rather than sympathy. Some claimed that her speech appeared to have been prepared and that she used religious terms as a shield. She was accused of turning what was primarily a moral and legal matter into a spiritual one. Some fans viewed her as a leader who was escaping reality, while others saw her as a committed warrior. Her words therefore carried a great deal of weight. Her decision to defend and deny ensured that the news would not fade too soon. The tale was no longer limited to one child's entrance, or the events of a family holiday. It was now about leadership, accountability, and trust. The way Christian organizations handled the Lamb family crisis is now being used to evaluate how they responded to allegations of abuse. Joni appeared to be comfortable in her role. She pretended that, on top of her personal issues, She was engaged in a spiritual struggle for the mission's future. Even if she had to or was certain of her beliefs, she refused to compromise. She made the decision to remain. She refused to acknowledge her defeat. Even if it meant opposing her own son and the way the sea was perceived by others, she would fight. This was brave, according to her fans. It was pride for people who didn't like her. But it was only a getaway for Joni. Together with her husband, she founded Daystar, cared for it as it expanded over the years, and carried on with its operations following his passing. She couldn't imagine losing everything because of something she knew wasn't true. She thus resisted, but not by apologizing. Rather, she disobeyed and resisted. Ultimately, Joni's reaction to the allegations was as poor as the charges themselves. In the sand, she had drawn a line. She wasn't to blame. Suzy and Jonathan were mistaken, and the expedition would continue. It's unclear if this will strengthen or weaken her reputation. One thing, however, was for sure. The battle for Joni Lamb's reputation had only just begun, and she had no intention of surrendering. The Lamb family never stopped talking about private matters. It was always a part of something greater to go through pain. There were issues that touched the core of Christian communities worldwide and had far-reaching effects beyond a single household. A child, a report of abuse, and the decisions made by the adults who were meant to protect her were at the heart of it all. It was hard to avoid discussing religion, the law, and right and wrong once those decisions were made public. This is what Texas law states. The police must be called right away by anyone who believes a youngster is being abused. Whether you are a family member, a teacher, or a pastor makes no difference. The need remains the same. You are unable to decide. It is not appropriate to discuss or pray about this in private at first. Protecting the most vulnerable is the aim of the mandate. Jonathan and Suzy could see this. They claimed that when things got out of control, they felt compelled to take action. However, things took a turn for the worse when they claimed that Joni was attempting to persuade them to remain silent for the benefit of the church. It was more than just a moral error. If it's true, it nearly broke the rules. At the conclusion of the initial inquiry, the police did not charge anyone since the child was unable to provide sufficient information. The prevalence of such circumstances is obvious to everyone who has encountered them. Children are frequently frightened, perplexed, and unable to describe what transpired in a way that investigators can comprehend. Due to stress, they are unable to speak. When an investigation is unsuccessful, though, the adults in their lives do not have to vanish. Support, tolerance, and being transparent then become even more crucial. Joni's actions were viewed by critics as the complete reverse of what they had anticipated. Diminution, deflection, and placing an excessive amount of value on appearance. At this period, faith and morals were engaged in a fierce battle. Christian leaders frequently discussed their sacred obligation to safeguard the defenseless. Church sermons emphasized the value of children, the importance of truth, and the necessity of responsibility. However, there is a tragic and lengthy history of religious organizations mishandling abuse reports. All too frequently, leaders attempt to address internal issues by seeking treatment, praying, or keeping quiet. They rely on the concepts of healing and forgiveness, which they occasionally confound with a substitute for justice. The circumstances surrounding the Lamb family were viewed by many as yet another illustration of this pattern. People were questioning whether Joni had truly decided to prioritize Daystar's reputation over her honesty. How many other departments followed suit? Furthermore, how many victims were denied justice because leaders were more terrified of being blamed than of facing consequences? This debate flared up among the Christian community. The accusations, according to Joni's supporters, were unfounded or the result of Jonathan's rage. They said that the conclusion of the review demonstrated that no further action was required. Some, however, were adamantly opposed. Why didn't instinct take over and call the police loudly? Why wasn't this handled with complete urgency from the start? Why not just tell people about it? They asked, even though the details were being argued about. To them, it made no difference what could be shown in court. It was about morals, what was proper, and what embodied the principles Daystar claimed to hold. The matter, Joni was informed, was one of trust. She claimed that she had done nothing wrong, and that she had not prevented her son from seeking justice. She believed that the story had been twisted and altered to paint her as the villain. However, the inquiries grew more intense each time she refused. Why did she appear to be more concerned with protecting the church than consoling her granddaughter? Why did she emphasize her innocence over the agony of her family in her initial public remarks? The mistrust was heightened by the absence of definitive responses. Because of the discussion, People also considered who should be in charge. Religious leaders hold a great deal of authority. They oversee both major religious communities and smaller ones. Their statements are significant. The choices they make have a profound impact on thousands of lives. It is your duty to lead honestly, even when it is painful, when you have that much authority. However, groups frequently disband to safeguard their own. Daystar's global popularity was fueled by its promise of authenticity. The crowd had faith that the Lamb family would set an example and speak the truth. However, that trust was destroyed when the allegations were revealed. Suddenly, a lot of decisions were being questioned. They questioned whether the entire culture of the ministry had been damaged. What did that fundamentally signify for the group? The moral dilemmas that Daystar faced were not unique to her. They had an impact on the entire Christian world. In the congregations, pastors argued over it. People whispered about it during Bible study. Some claimed that a family was being torn apart by the enemy's falsehoods, and that this was a spiritual conflict. Others described it as a wake-up call that demonstrated the need for Christian groups to answer to their leaders more accountable. Either way, the discussion had to take place. As the incident continued, people were subjected to increasing moral pressure. A family dispute, or even a legal matter, wasn't the only thing going on here. It concerned whether or not religious organizations actually adhered to the laws they preached. Did they assist those in need? Or did they try to avoid embarrassment? Did they choose the truth despite the pain? Or did they decide to keep quiet when it was appropriate? Jonathan and Suzy's choice to openly discuss their concerns was viewed by many as a courageous act of conscience. They claimed that no matter what, God had commanded them to speak up. The whole event felt to Joni like an assault on her character, her mission, and her legacy. Both sides were certain that they were headed in the correct way. However, there were more significant issues, such as morality, the law, and whether or not Christian rule was appropriate in the midst of them. Many of those questions still remain. Did Joni fail to fulfill her responsibilities as a leader and a grandmother? Did her quest for justice get in the way of her dread of scandal? Or did she actually fall prey to a fabrication motivated by animosity? Even while the courts may judge some aspects of the case, many individuals who once looked up to her already have moral conclusions in their minds. That's the primary problem. There is more to the Lamb event than merely a family tale. Examining the church from this angle allows you to determine whether the religion it espouses is resilient enough to face the challenges of reality. When Suzy and Jonathan Lamb first made the decision to speak up, they might have believed that their remarks would create a stir. A deluge of news reports was what they were unprepared for. It began as casual conversation in internet forums and church lobbies, but it swiftly grew into a full-fledged media frenzy. After a few weeks, the Lamb family was unable to cope with their sorrow. With news articles, headlines, and a ton of social media discussion, it had turned into a public event. Every element that contributed to the story's fascination was present. Arguments between parents and matriarchs, a well-known Christian family with a robust ministry, allegations of abuse and efforts to conceal it, and the struggle between religion and celebrity. Reporters enjoy stories that are difficult to distinguish between holy and frightening. It was quite difficult to miss this one. All networks, even Christian-only and large national networks, desired it. There was no turning back once the cameras were focused on Daystar. The issue was witnessed by many more people than simply those in the church or ministry, since Jonathan and Suzy told media about it. As they discussed their sobs, trembling voices, and even their fear of punishment, millions of others watched. To begin the narrative, the news anchors used aggressive language. Why wouldn't a well-known Christian family defend their own? The audience leaned closer together. Lamb was immediately recognizable to anyone unfamiliar with Daystar. Not because of broadcasting or teaching, but because of scandal. Joni was unable to cope with the pressure. Her life and career had been centered around image. Many people believed she was more than just a reporter. This woman made Daystar a household name in Christian media by carrying on her husband's work after his death. Every word she spoke drew intense attention.